Hello everyone and welcome to our live talk, How to Study Medieval Artefacts. Archaeology is a tool that we can use to understand the communities who came before us. Through excavation, we can unearth tangible evidence and start to answer questions about people of the past. But how? How do archaeologists study an artifact and pull out all this information? What do we do with the artifacts that we find? How do we look after them? All these questions are ones that we're going to be answering tonight. In this talk, we're going to explore the study of artifacts using real examples from real digs overseen by DigVentures. Plus, we'll show you how you can learn more with our brand new online course, which is launching at the end of this month. So stick around to see how you can sign up and learn more about the wonderful world of artifacts. If you haven't met me before, my name is Ginny and I'm a community archaeologist with DigVentures. Here tonight to help demonstrate some of our favourite medieval artefacts is my fellow community archaeologist, Freddie. And in the background, as our bouncer tonight, Maya is joining us from YouTube, looking after all of you in the chat and keeping an eye on things as well. And of course, last but not least, we have all of you guys too. This is an interactive event, so don't be shy. The event is for you to learn, and if you enjoy tonight, to go on and dig a little bit deeper into the world of artifacts with our online course. So let's kick off with what's coming up tonight. So we're going to start off with a bit of an introduction to artifacts. I'm going to tell you all about artifacts, what they are, why they're important, and what happens to them on and off site. We're also going to talk about what we mean by medieval. Context is everything, so Freddie's going to introduce us to medieval archaeology before he dives into some of our highlights. He's going to show off some of our favourite medieval finds from our digs across the UK. And then, last but not least, we'll cover, as I said, how you can learn more about the world of artifacts with our brand new online course. And we'll have a quick Q&A at the end as well, if we've got time for any questions that you might have thought up while watching us. I'm going to quickly go over our house rules, all the classics here. Don't forget to use the chat to submit questions for the Q&A. On top of that, keep using the chat throughout the talk tonight. Converse with each other, ask us any questions, share anything that you've seen or uncovered in your journeys through archaeology. But do keep it kind and constructive and friendly, or fear being booted out by our virtual bouncer. And last but not least, as always, this is a live stream, so do be patient with us if anything does go wrong, and we'll try and fix that as soon as possible so we can get back to streaming. But to start tonight's event, as I said, I'm going to take us back to the basics. Tonight we're learning how to study medieval artifacts, and I think to start explaining this, we need to strip back our understanding to something simple. What is an artifact? Artifacts are a huge part of archaeology, and they're really vital to understanding the sites that we dig. Every site is unique, and digging produces its own unique material evidence. When archaeologists dig a site, they hopefully come away with a number of artifacts which can tell us more about that place. Artifacts are objects which have been made or directly modified by humans. So that can include anything from pottery to tools to coins or jewellery. And they can range from those sort of everyday things, those everyday objects, to those once-in-a-lifetime discoveries. We differentiate between those everyday things and those big once-in-a-lifetime things by separating them into two categories. We have something called bulk finds, which refers to commonly occurring artifacts, things like pottery, sherds, or CBM, whereas special finds refers to archaeologically significant finds. But from the big to the small, every object has the potential to tell us something about that site. Most finds are going to fall into the bulk finds category, which tend to be divided up into material type and studied as an assemblage, so as a group or a collection. Whereas special finds have the potential to tell us something significant all on their own. For instance, the Lindisfarne game piece, you can see that on the screen there. There's another close-up. This is an example of a really significant find, which on its own we can study it and it can tell us really significant information about that site. Freddie, later on in his segment, is going to demonstrate some of the different material types that we find and, of course, show off some of our special finds. But for now, I think the next thing to discuss is, why are artifacts important? The importance of an artifact in archaeology really lies in what it can tell us. Artifacts help us connect with communities who may no longer exist. By piecing together the puzzle of a find, we can understand more about that community. So it can teach us things about trade and wealth, about social stratification, about religion and community practices, health and diet, politics, and even about the formation of the site itself physically. If you want to dive more into those topics, you can find out more on the online course. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into all of them tonight, or I think we would be here for a very, very long time. Meanwhile, anyone who has tried their hand at excavation who's watching here tonight will know that there's something very important that I've not touched on yet, and that is context. As we say at DigVentures, for anyone who's familiar with us, context is everything. Archaeologists always record the context in which an artifact was discovered, if it was discovered in a context at all. In context finds are artifacts which were discovered in their original archaeological setting, so deliberately placed in a grave or dropped into the bottom of a moat. They've been found where they were originally left. Out of context refers to finds or artifacts which have been disturbed over time and they've been removed from that original setting. For instance, through ploughing might have knocked them out of that setting. Ideally, we want to find and we want to look for artifacts that are in context. This is because it sort of situates it in the bigger picture of the site. While we can study finds that are found out of context, it's hard to understand their significance without the rest of the puzzle. On site, every artifact that we uncover is bagged up and labelled with its context. So it's very important, and we always keep an eye on that context. When we find things like special finds, we also photograph them and record them in situ or in the ground before they're lifted. Bulk finds don't need to be photographed in situ, but they will be placed in finds trays which are labelled with that context to make sure that when we do bag them up, when we do sort of store them away, we can be sure exactly which layer of site they've come from. So everything revolves around this context. Talking about bagging things up, it's a very important thing to look after our finds. So on site, as I mentioned, everything will be bagged up. Special finds are going to receive their own bag, while bulk finds are going to be bagged up based on material type and context. After leaving site, or in the finds room, if we're lucky enough to have a finds room on site, we don't always have that opportunity. Finds will be gently cleaned and conserved and prepared for the next step of their journey, which is a very, very important one on that step into finds. Once we've recovered and recorded our finds, they're stored and ready to be sent on to a finds specialist. This is a word you might have heard before if you've been familiar with archaeology. The thing about archaeology is it's such a broad subject, and there are so many different types of objects out there that it is pretty much impossible, but it would be very impressive for an archaeologist to know everything there is to know about every single type of artifact that we find out there. So find specialists are archaeologists who have dedicated their training and their study to understanding one particular type of find. So whether that's pottery or flint or coins or animal bone, we send them those artifacts that we've uncovered in the context in which they're found, and they can study them and tell us more about them. So they'll go through all these finds that we have uncovered, they'll identify them and quantify those artifacts, count them and weigh them, and from there they're going to produce a report which us archaeologists back at DigVentures or whatever company is sent on those finds can then incorporate in an all-encompassing dig report, which summarizes all the information, all the evidence, all the data that we've captured from one site into a handy document. So we have quite a few of those reports, and you can read them over on our website at digventures.com if you are interested. So yes, those reports, they take all this information from specialists and the information from site, and they pull it together and pull together these big conclusions, the things that we're asking ourselves when we start conducting these digs. So things like, what was life like for the people on this site? So there we have it. That is a very, very brief introduction to finds. Like I said, I really wish I could go into more detail because it really is such a massive part of archaeology that I don't think we hear about very often. But I think we would probably need, as I said, a few days to cover it all and do it all justice. But if artifacts have got you hooked, if anything you've heard while I've been talking has really caught your interest, there is a way that you can dig deeper into this aspect of archaeology. And that is, as I mentioned, our brand new online course. So for anyone who isn't familiar with our online course, starting from the 30th of April, we've got a course called The Introduction to Archaeological Finds from Dig to Museum. And that will take you through everything that I've discussed today in more detail, and everything that Freddie is going to discuss, and everything that we'll discuss later on in this talk. And it will take you beyond and tell you even more. So if you are really interested and you want to learn more, you can head to digventures.com/calendar to find out more and to sign up for that course, whether you want to purchase that course on its own or become a subscriber and have access to all of our online archaeology courses. But for now, we've talked a lot about finds, but I reckon it's time that we get a real look at some of them. So as I mentioned earlier today, and as the title suggests, we've decided just to focus on the world of medieval finds today, because as I said, it's so broad and there's so much out there. There's so much content that we could have gone through, but we've narrowed it right down. So let me hand over to my colleague Freddie, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the world of medieval archaeology to really help you get that grounding, that context. As I said, context is everything. And then he's going to show off some of our favourite medieval discoveries from recent years. So I'll pass over now to Freddie.
Yes, thank you, Ginny. Hi, I'm Freddie. For anyone who doesn't know me, I am a archaeologist at DigVentures, and I am in charge of all of our finds. So that means I get to go through all of the good stuff that we dig up, which I do enjoy a lot. So to begin with, I thought I would first kind of say, what is medieval? What does medieval mean? Because it's one of those things that is said a lot, but not really kind of gone into, because there's people have different ideas of what medieval means, and even though we've narrowed tonight down to the medieval period, that is still quite a large bit of history to look at. And then after that, I will go into a bit more about the common finds that we get on sites, the things you're expected to find when you hear a medieval site, and then I'll show you some more unusual things that are quite a bit more interesting to look at. So, what is medieval? So, the medieval period is roughly from the 5th century until about 1485 is kind of the period that people agree on, mostly. It gets a bit hazy on where the medieval period ends and the medieval period begins, but most of the time it's 1485, which, for those of you who aren't aware, is the Battle of Bosworth, when the Tudors come into power, and most people count that as the end of the medieval period and the start of the post-medieval period. And the post-medieval period ends at the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century. And the medieval period, the early medieval period, which I will be saying a lot because a couple of our sites, namely Lindisfarne, is from the early medieval period, and that is from the end of the Romans leaving in the 5th century up until 1066 in the Norman conquest, when William the Conqueror arrives, and we get this feudal system coming in to England. And then this feudal system, William the Conqueror This brings in what we call the later medieval period, or some might say the high medieval period, which is when you get your classic, or what you see in fantasies, your big castles, your big settlements, things like that. That's what you'll get when you hear about the medieval period post 1066. That's what people tend to think about is that kind of period when medieval is said. So there are several different kinds of sites. These sites are what you'd expect to dig in a medieval site. So these are things like settlements. Settlements are the most common site that you'll probably find. They range from really small little farming settlements, hamlets, all the way up until big towns. You see the larger settlements a lot more in the later periods. In the early medieval period, it is quite rare because they were building a lot more out of perishable materials like wood. Then you also get your monastic and ecclesiastical sites. So these are your Christianity, your Christian sites. So this is from in the early medieval period. Is you'd often find these big monasteries like on Lindisfarne and some small churches. And then as you get further through the medieval period, you tend to get a lot more of these village churches and these big cathedrals like Durham Cathedral and York Minster. And then, of course, you get your castles. Everyone loves a good castle. I love a good castle, walking around them. And those ones are, there's big castles, but they can also be kind of fortified manor houses almost. So sites like Salton that we've dug, it's kind of quite a large mound with just a fortified house on top. So those are your medieval sites. Those are some examples. I will be talking a lot more in depth about which sites some of these finds are from later on, but that's just give you a good idea of what I'm talking about when I'm saying, oh, this is from the early medieval, or this is from the later medieval period, because it can get a bit confusing. So it's bulk finds now, and one of the bulk finds you expect to find in every medieval site is animal bones. Animal bones are your classic kind of, if you're digging on where people have inhabited, you're expecting to find animal bones. And I've got some here, so I can get them. Hopefully you can see in the camera. So here, I've got a nice jaw from a cow. You can see only 3 of the teeth are left in it. The rest is broken off, unfortunately. And this is from a site called Coldingham. And this is an early medieval site which got quite a lot of animal bone from there. And that was another monastic site like Lindisfarne. And finding animal bone is very useful. It can tell us quite a lot about the site. You're most commonly going to find domesticated animals on medieval sites. So this is your pigs, sheep, goats, cow, horse, dog. Sometimes you get deer in kind of nicer sites, like, for example, Pontefract Castle and Bishop Midland. Bishop Midland Castle, which was used by the bishops of Durham. They had a deer park there. So that's when you expect to find deer. You can also get smaller mammals on occasion. These are things like wild rabbits that people have hunted. And then you can also find larger mammals, like the example that we use is we found a bear claw at Lindisfarne. This is probably not because they had a bear roaming around the island. It's probably from some Norman person's rug. And the claw was just on the end of the bear rug that they got imported. So, what else can animal bones tell us? Well, they can tell us about the diet, so what people were eating, what animals they were eating. Was it more to do with the animals, the terrestrial animals that I've just mentioned, or was it more to do with marine animals, like were they eating a lot of fish? And then also functions in the settlements. If you're finding a lot of forelimbs of animals, like the feet and the skulls, you're probably in a leather making area, like a tannery, because those would have been kept on the pelts as they worked them. And this brings me on to the primary versus secondary kind of uses for animals. So the primary is what you get from killing the animal. That's your meat, your bone, your horn, things like that, your pelts. And then you get your secondary, which is your renewable sources like wool and milk, and even manure for your fields. It's very useful. And so that's kind of another use that animals would have had, which is why we just get a lot of animal bone in the medieval period. Um, yeah, and so that's animal bone. You would be it would be very surprising if you weren't finding animal bone. It would be more unusual. You'd think, what's going on here, if you were digging a settlement and you weren't finding much animal bone at all. Um, so that's one material type. The next material type that we'd expect to find in a medieval settlement or a medieval site is pottery, particularly green glaze. And some of you who were here last week may have seen this example, because it's quite a nice example. So this, I'll try and hold it so you can see the green on it. So that is the handle of a jug or a flagon. So that would come down and round again. I mean, quite a sizable pot. And green glaze is very synonymous with the medieval period, but mainly with the post early medieval period. So your high medieval and your post medieval. You tend to not get glazed ware in the early medieval period, as their pottery making was by hand. They weren't using a wheel during that period, so it doesn't survive as well. It's very dog biscuity, and it's quite rare. So the green glaze, you tend to get the way that they did green glaze is from the iron and also by the copper. It's mainly the iron, which if you see in this, it's actually not that green. It's quite yellowy browny, and that's because there's a lot more iron in this than copper, and that's why it gives it that color. They can range from yellows through to greens through to browns. Green glaze does cover quite a broad spectrum of kinds of glazes. You can get some really green pottery called Tudor green in the Tudor period, with a lot of copper in that. So that's about mid 13th to 15th century is when you find the green glaze, and then you don't find it produced after that period as much. It falls in popularity post 15th century, but it's still made a little bit. The main forms you get are these flagons and these jugs, jars, things like that. They're the most common. But there are other forms, things like bowls and cups, crucibles for smelting in, smelting metal, inkwells, and my favourite is a bung hole jar, which is used in brewing. I like the name of it. And then there are other domestic potteries, but are much more roughware, that are kind of produced locally, not traded around like green glaze would have been. Green glaze would be made in pottery making centres, and then distributed. Whereas if you were wanting a pot quickly, you probably just make it yourself or get someone who you knew to make it for you. And then other things that you would use for dishes and things are you use wood. You just turn wood for using bowls and plates and things, which is why you tend to find less pottery in the medieval period than let's say in the Roman period, where they're mass producing pottery, just heaps and heaps of it. I think we found over 3,000 sherds of pottery last year at our East Yorkshire site, compared to a few hundred from our site at Sultan. So you can see there's a big difference. And Sultan is a fortified manor house, and so that one's even quite a wealthy site, and that still didn't have quite a very large amount of pottery compared to the Roman period. So those are kind of the two main material types you expect to find from a medieval site. There are other ones, other materials that I'll quickly go into now. Things like shell, particularly like at Lindisfarne on a coastal site, you get a lot of shells like oysters and winkles, and that's showing the dependency on the sea, because that'll ease the kind of dependency on terrestrial animals. If these oyster shells are easier to get. And they can also tell us if we find a lot of shells inland, were they trading them and things like that. Another bulk find, sometimes we can class metal as bulk finds, not all the time, but in the medieval period, certainly, again, the later medieval period and the post-medieval period, metal is being produced quite en masse. Things like nails, iron nails, those are kind of the things that we probably wouldn't class as a special find if we're getting lots of them. For example, at Midland Castle that we dug 2021, I think it was, we found loads of nails, and that was from the timber structure that was built there. That's why you tend to find a lot of nails, and we kept finding so many of them that we didn't bother to give a special number to each of them, because we found hundreds of nails there. And then you've also got your ceramic building material, your CBM. So that's your things like floor tiles, roof tiles, and also as you get further into the post-medieval period, bricks and things like that. You tend to find that stuff more in wealthier places, castles, wealthy houses, or churches. You get a lot of these floor tiles in the churches. I have one here, but I'll show you later because it's quite a nice one. And then, of course, you get carved masonry, which is often, sometimes we do small find it, but sometimes if it's just a lump of stone that's clearly been worked but nothing's interesting on it, you tend not to small find that, but it's still interesting. Ooh, so that's kind of the main bulk finds that you'll get. I'll now go into some more interesting finds. The way I might do this is I'm going to show you a find, and I would like it if in the chat, if you guys wanted to have a guess, I'll give it for like a few seconds, and you can have a guess, and then I'll let you know what it might be. So I think we'll start off easy. I've got this, if I hold it up, this here. Hopefully you can see that. Does anyone want to take a guess about what that might be?
Drum roll. Any guesses?
Drum roll.
Don't be shy. Could you maybe describe what sort of material we've got there, Freddie?
Yeah, so this is made from bone. It's turned bone. Yeah. So, and it's quite sizable, about 5 centimeters, I'd say. And it's got some nice grooves put in there, and yeah. So what this is a bone pin. So you'd kind of get those in the more domestic setting. You tend to not find them very commonly in workplaces like a smeltery or something like that. You'd get that in a domestic setting, and probably a reasonably wealthy setting. You wouldn't bat an eyelid if you found that in a castle, for example. And that one was actually found at Pontefract Castle, and so that was a nice one as well, because it's complete as well. It's whole. It wouldn't have really been used, as a sharp pin. It would have been used to hold clothes together.
We had some good guesses in the chat. We had a couple of people say hairpins, so that was really close, actually.
Yeah. Hairpin in this instance is probably too large for a hairpin. It's not quite small enough. But that's a good guess. And then next item, go a little harder. This is an incomplete item, so I'll let you know now. But if I hold that close, hopefully you can see that.
Well, let's see any guesses in the chat.
So this part of it is made from bone, turned bone again, and this part is made from copper. So it's actually two different materials used as one. So that is the handle of an implement. We're actually not quite sure. So what you guessed in the chat, it might be something. It might be that, but it's an animal bone and copper handle or something. Probably a stylus. So something that they use to point on text and things. That one again was from Pontefract Castle. A lot of these will be from Pontefract Castle because the sheer amount of stuff that we got from that site, it was fantastic. It was a very rich and wealthy site. So that one is what that is. Now let's see if we can do something a little different. All right, here we go. This one is quite small. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. If I hold that right there. So this is some glass. And why would we be wondering what kind of glass it is in the medieval period? Only if I can really show you. It's not very smooth, the glass. Might be a little help there. So that is a bit of stained glass. So what you'd expect to find it in a church setting. So that's what that one is. That's from Sudley Castle. So that might have come from the church that was there, or when it went into disuse. It could have come from there.
Great.
So
From Jan, who guessed window glass. Well done.
Awesome. Right, let's see about this. This assuming little ball here is metal. And it's very round.
How heavy is it?
Oh, it's reasonably heavy for its size, I would say.
Okay.
I think people might be able to get that one.
Guesses dropping in.
Yeah. And so that one is a musket ball. That's definitely going into the post-medieval period. But yeah, so that's a nice musket ball there. You get quite a lot of them in medieval sites. Some you tend to find them on higher contexts in a earlier medieval site. So if you're looking at a site that's been used for a long time, you tend to actually find a lot of them there because people in the post-medieval period didn't really build new settlements in places. They just built upon the ones that were already there. Whereas from the early medieval into the medieval period, you got a lot more settlements appearing. Now from that, we're going a bit larger. Similar ideas though, and we've got this.
See if you can in the chat.
I'm going to show you the size comparisons. There you go. It's not complete. It would have been spherical.
For anyone, by the way, who is struggling to see the chat, I think if you refresh your page, I think we had a bit of a technical hiccup with the chat at the start. You should be able to see it, and then you'll be able to drop your guess. But we've got quite a few guesses coming through. A lot of people saying one particular thing. I'll give it maybe a couple of seconds to refresh.
Yeah. So that one, Jean, do you have an idea about what that one was?
Well, lots of people in the chat are saying cannonball.
Yeah, correct. And it's not actually a metal cannonball; it's a stone cannonball. So it's not too heavy, but that kind of tells us that it's probably an earlier cannonball, which is a weird thing to say. But they did actually have cannonballs in the medieval period, towards the end of the medieval period, particularly towards the end of the 100 Years' War. They actually used them in sieges. So that is something that people don't often think about, as these big cannons being used in the medieval period, but they were a thing there. And that one was found at found at Pontefract Castle. That's a nice piece. And then this one might be a bit trickier. I reckon some people might be able to have a guess at this. But I've got this here. I'm going to try and show you. So this is metal. I'm not going to say what kind of metal it is because it might give it away. But you might be able to guess. It's got a nice groove on either side. If that helps.
This one's very intriguing.
Yeah.
Ooh, a
Good.
few guesses coming through. All very
Yeah.
similar. Would you like
Yeah.
to reveal what the chat is saying, Freddie?
So this is some window cane or window lead. So it's a bit of lead, and it goes quite well with the stained glass earlier, because this would have been used between the glass panes in the stained glass. And so that's another high status kind of find that when we first find it, we're excited by it, but not necessarily. When you look at it, it's like, oh, it's just a lump of lead, but it does mean that glass would have been present in the windows, which is always nice to find.
Fantastic guesses in the chat, by the way. Like Maya said, everyone is very good at this.
Yeah, I love it. Last one on my camera here, and then we'll move to some smaller objects. But this, I think people might be able to get this one. I mentioned it earlier. This is a bit of CBM, is what it's made from, ceramic building material. It's got a nice pattern on it.
This
Bit
is
of
one of my
porcelain.
favorites. I love this one.
Now, this was found at Sudeley in 2023, so it's not actually been sent off to specialists yet. So you've seen this before the specialists. But yeah, so this is a bit of medieval floor tile, and probably from a church. They would have been in groups of four, would have made up a whole pattern, and then they would have been placed next to another group of four to make up the whole floor. But I liked it really nicely because you can actually kind of see part of the pattern, so the kind of the leaf pattern that comes off there. And that would have probably been facing the outside of the pattern of the group of four, and the other ones would have been around it. So that was actually found in Sealy Castle Gardens when we were looking at the Tudor gardens, but this was from the earlier medieval period. So that was quite nice to see kind of evidence of Sealy pre-Tudor period, which is nice because this year we're going to Sealy to look at the medieval period. So it was a nice pointer to show what we might find. Cool. So if we move on to, I've got a nice digital microscope set up next to me. This is our first object. Now the lighting is a little poor where I am, so I'm going to use my phone light to try and cast light on it, so you can see it a little better. There you go. So this is a coin. I'm gonna let you know now. It's a coin. But what kind of coin? It's a very specific kind of coin. And there's one side of it. I'm going to turn it over, and there's the other side of it. So it's quite a small coin. It's less than a centimeter in diameter, just under, I reckon. But it's a really nice coin, and that's a early medieval coin, an Anglo-Saxon coin from Lindisfarne, and we can actually pinpoint to where this came from, and this was from Aenred. The ruler was Aenred. That's Eanred, and he was a ruler of Northumberland at the time, or Northumbria, and that dates to 810 to 841 AD. So that's, I think, shows just how cool coins can be, which is why we tend to be really excited when we find coins. So we can actually pinpoint between 31 years of when this coin was from, which you can't really do that much with just animal bone. So it's all of these things together, in these contexts really make the whole story. But coins like this are really cool. This one was found in 2019. I think we had maybe 4 or 5 that year. And most years we get that many. Whereas in 2023 we actually found 15 of them, and they're currently getting looked at as well. So we found a large number of Anglo-Saxon coins that you don't find that many in the UK really. So that's the Anglo-Saxon coin. I'm now gonna move to this. which I'm going to rotate it so it's the right way. So hopefully you'll be able to see this. I'm going to try and point out the details of this. So this is made of silver, but you can see. So here are his eyes and a crown and his mouth. So this is Edward the Fourth, and he was. This was from Pontefract Castle again, I think, and he was a ruler from. I can always never remember those dates. From about 1460 to 70, or 1471 to 83, because he ruled twice. Or it was moneyed twice. So that's a nice. You can really still see the bust there, which is what I really enjoy. You can see, yeah. So I can use my mouse here, so if you can see, there's his eyes. The eyes have turned a little bit larger than they probably should have been, but it's about the same size as the early medieval coin, the Anglo-Saxon coin. Unlike, I'm actually gonna, if we go back to just my screen, I'm actually gonna show you this larger coin, which is very, it's very degraded. You can just about see a pattern on this side, which I'll show you in a second. But I just want to show you how large that is compared to, if I get the coin of Edward, there you go. So that's how small they are, just to give you an idea. So if we go back to the microscope, hopefully you'll be able to see there's a slight pattern there. If you can see that. Now, we're not too sure about where this is from. We think it's Austro-Burgundian, but it's quite illegible, so actually unsure about when it was from. It's probably the late medieval, early post-medieval. And that's a copper alloy, and that's much larger, as you can see. And then we come on to this piece here. So you might be able to see on the other side. Slight pattern here of some fleur-de-lis. It's very hard to see, but it's in that square. If I could get my light to show you. Hopefully you can see that. But that, you might notice there's a big hole in that. And that's because this is not actually a coin. We do get this sometimes, where you will find something that looks like a coin, but actually is what we call a token. And those tokens are technically not money, but they kind of were used as money when times were tough, when people couldn't get the money either through conflict or other means. People would use tokens to kind of show that they owed that money to whoever they paid with the tokens. It was kind of like a debt. And so that's what that is, and that's also copper alloy as well. That's a nice piece. And then finally we have this, which when we first found this, we thought that this was made of pewter and was just a button from the Victorian medieval costume party, because we found it in the Sudeley Castle, in the castle gardens, and we knew the person who lived there in the Victorian period, Emma Dent, loved to have medieval garden parties. So this is what we assumed it was at first. But what it turns out to be is actually a silver cufflink from Charles II. And we know it's Charles II because the symbol is often associated with Charles II, and it's a heart with fire coming out the top and two arrows going through it. And so that was really exciting when we didn't know that was what it was until months later after we'd finished digging. So this is why we're quite excited to go back there again. because we'd be getting these kind of medieval and post-medieval finds there that point to quite a really nice collection of finds that we could get. Yeah, and you can see actually underneath it. This is why we thought it was a button, because you've got that nice little loop. If you can see there you go. So yeah, there you go. So that was a brief tour. There's so many more artifacts I could go in and show you, but that's just a brief tour of kind of the different kinds of artifacts from the usual artifacts like the bone and the pottery to the much more unique artifacts that you might stop and think, oh, what is this? Or, oh, this is something special. Things like that. So now I think Ginny and I will briefly tell you about what happens to the finds kind of afterwards, and then we'll do a bit of a Q&A. I think you're still muted, Ginny.
Still muted. So we have about 15 minutes, so I will very, very quickly sort of run through what happens after, but it does link quite nicely into a Q&A question that I have seen coming through quite a lot, and that is sort of who owns the finds and what happens to them. So this all does tie in very nicely. So as I'm sure you can all imagine, once a dig is complete, finds become part of the archaeological record. So they can be deposited within an archive or a museum and available for wider study. But in terms of who owns them, which is a question that's been coming through quite a lot, it can vary from case to case. It's not necessarily a one sort of answer suits all situation. Ownership can stay with the landowner, even if they don't physically keep the artifacts. But in other cases, ownership might be transferred. But what is very, very important to note is that archaeologists, we do not keep anything we find. It all becomes part of that sort of archaeological record, and we don't get any money for finding treasure or anything like that. As far as we're concerned, the past belongs to everyone, so our job is to sort of protect access to these artifacts for future generations. So whether that is through an archive, as I said, where they can be sort of accessed for study, or for really, really exciting finds, they can go into museums as well. But as I think me and Freddie have made it abundantly clear, it's such a huge subject. There's so much that you can dig into, hence why find specialists are a thing, because it's just too much for one mind to sort of know everything there is. But if you want to sort of get a overarching idea of what finds are like, as I said, you can check out our online course. So one more time, I will remind you that you can find out lots more there. So if you head to digventures.com/calendar, the link is on the screen here for you. If you want to sign up for our online course, I'd recommend it. It's really great. My colleagues have put together some really wonderful information, including Freddie. Freddie has helped out on the course, and you can learn all that you need to know about archaeological finds and artifacts and what happens next. But otherwise, are there any other questions that are coming through? Let's see. So Terry has said, Freddie, you might want to take this, that we don't number the nails. I believe this is in reference to the nails that you mentioned earlier from Sultan. She's asked, does each piece get a number?
For the nails.
The nails, yeah.
If we are, so they'll only get a specific number when they're small found. If we class them as a special find, then we'll give each individual nail a number. Sometimes we'll get, if it's a deposit of nails clustered together, we might give them one number, all of them together, just one small find number. And if we're not small finding them, we tend to just count how many there are and weigh them, much like we do with all the other finds. We wouldn't actually give them a specific number. Sometimes a specialist likes to number them just to help them when they are, wanting to say which nail is a bit more interesting than the others, or when they're trying to describe it. They might do that, but we won't do that ourselves.
Absolutely, yeah. Hopefully that answers your question for you, Terry. There's lots of really interesting questions coming through. I'm trying to decide which ones to go for. There's so many good ones. One that I quite like, Mike has asked, do archaeologists disagree often about what the finds are? That's a really interesting question. What would
Yeah,
you?
it is. Yeah, well, I think in the field, certainly, before
Mm,
when we first dug something up, there's definitely a lot of umming and ahhing about what things might be. Sometimes it's quite obvious, sometimes it's less so. For example, I'm pretty sure when if we go back to this, when this was dug up, this handle, I think people were kind of arguing about what it probably would have been used for, what it was. Um, so it really, it does depend. But when it goes to the specialists and they look at it, they tend to kind of, what they say is often correct. It's very rarely you find a specialist that identifies something wrong. It can happen, with things that have never been seen before. That's when you tend to find people misidentify them. But if things, a lot of the things that I've shown you here, um, most of those are known artifacts, so they tend to not be as misinterpreted. Let's say.
yeah, yeah. As we were saying, sort of these find specialists, they know everything there is to know about a really sort of specific subset of artifacts, and so they've got this sort of wealth of knowledge that they can draw on. And other sites are really useful as well for identifying sort of contemporary finds. If you look at work that other archaeologists have done, it can help you out. But yeah, no, there can be a little bit of disagreement on the trench edge every now and then.
It's not uncommon, especially not just the finds. People will argue about the actual archaeology as well, the
Yeah,
soil.
yeah, absolutely. Let's see another question. Someone has asked, do we do carbon dating on organic items? I think that's a really good question because dating is another thing that is such like you can really sort of deep dive into the world of dating. You've got relative dating, which is sort of where you date an artifact using sort of other artifacts that may have come from site. So it's called relative because you're not really pinpointing, you're kind of giving a guesstimation almost of what kind of date that artifact might be from based on the layer it's been found in and what other artifacts have been found in that layer that might maybe be more datable. But then, as you mentioned, carbon dating, so that's an absolute dating technique. So these are some of our more kind of scientific techniques. And you're right that organic items or carbon based items can be carbon dated. Is there anything you want to add on, Freddie, about carbon dating? Or
Yeah, we'll tend to carbon date charcoal and animal bones mostly. We tend to not carbon date things like the pin I showed you first, um, that's made of bone, like an item that's made of bone, because we want to keep it intact because carbon dating destroys part of that the artifact, the object. So we tend to choose things that we don't mind being destroyed for that date. So if you find quite a bit of animal bone in the same context as that pin, you definitely go with the animal bone if you wanted to date that.
yeah, no, definitely. We've had a couple of questions come through asking a similar kind of thing, basically about soil types and preservation. Freddie, I think you're probably better to talk on this than me. Again, it's one of those topics where you could probably do a whole hour on soil type and preservation, but in like the most basic sense, give us the rundown on soil type.
Yeah. So your two kind of main different soil types are your acidic and your alkaline. Your organic material, like your bone and your and things like that, they will not survive as well in acidic. They'll be much more flaky if they survive at all, and they much prefer an alkaline um, environment. Whereas other things get kind of ground down a lot more in alkaline because they tend to be more waterlogged deposits, alkaline deposits like clays and things like that. So metal in that instance is actually doesn't survive as well. It actually rusts a lot more. So it really does depend. You tend to not really find one soil type that is best for preservation. You just have to accept that you're going to have more of the other, which doesn't impact. If you're not finding a lot of organic material, a lot of bones, it could be just because the soil type has made them all degrade and disappear from the record.
Thank you very much, Freddie. So hopefully that answers you guys who are interested in soil preservation. And again, a lot of these topics you can, if you want to take our course, you will find out more about these things in a bit more detail. And also a bit of Google surfing is always great as well. You can go down some real interesting deep dives into soil and all sorts of things. Let's see. Oh, a couple of interesting questions. I'm going to start with, I don't know if I can think of anything off the top of my head for this one, but Philippa has asked, Freddie, you might know, have we ever found anything that nobody can identify? I can think of a couple of things where we can't sort of fully decide on if we're absolutely sure what it is. I've seen at least one thing where even specialists aren't 100% sure, but we can usually give a guesstimation. Is there anything you can?
Yeah, um, that's a good question. There is one thing I actually have it here with me,
Oh, that's good.
which it wasn't planned, but yeah, hopefully you'll be able to see this. It is medieval. We know that it's come from a medieval context. It's just a little sheet of copper with some markings on it. It's quite flat, but we're not 100% sure what it is. Um, we think it's probably like an offcut from a larger sheet that would have been used either as decoration for something like on a scabbard, or a sheath or something like that. But we're actually we're actually not sure. We have to say we're not sure on that one, because it's so unusual and it's not. If it's whole, if it's a complete object, we're we're stumped about what it might be.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, that's a
So
really
yeah, it does happen sometimes. We just have to say at that point what we don't know until we find more examples of it in the context.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And actually, speaking of context, Mike had a question. Mike asked, is there a general depth of context downward where medieval finds appear statistically? I
Ooh,
think,
statistically, ooh.
I don't know if
It's
anyone's done any statistics.
no, that'd be interesting to
Yeah,
see. But it again, it is to do with goes back to the soil type, in terms of how deep it is and kind of the environment. For example, um, if we're in a field that's been ploughed a lot, it actually tends to be quite deep because they keep pulling the soil up and kind of burying it further down. Whereas if we're on like a headland, so for example, a site at Carvi, which is an Iron Age site, we only need to go down maybe 15 centimeters, if that, and we're into Iron Age. And that's also helps the fact that there hasn't been any occupation post Iron Age on that headland. But it really just depends from site to site about how far down it goes. It's why when we start digging a site and the diggers come in, we have to watch them because to make sure that we don't go through that level of archaeology. We always are tentative with the first few scoops to kind of get down to that level, and then we know where we are.
yeah, no, definitely. I think, yeah, every site is very unique, and you've got to sort of treat every site differently. And when you're sort of coming in and, as you say, making those initial scoops, it can sort of pop up anywhere. Oh, there's so many good questions, and I would really love to answer some more, but we've run out of time. But there are really fascinating questions in the chat that I wish we could have time to get into. But if anyone does have any lingering questions and they're sort of desperate for an answer, we do have email. You are more than welcome to get in touch, and Freddie or myself will respond to you and answer any of those burning questions. But I am afraid we are very much out of time. So we'll say a quick farewell to Freddie for now, and I will pop us over to our end slide so that we can wrap up. So thank you very much, Freddie. Thank you. Let's pop over, and here we are. So as I said, some amazing questions in the chat. Apologies for a bit of a technical glitch in the beginning, but hopefully you've all been able to access the chat and ask any questions that you might have. And if you do have lingering questions about finds, and I know I've mentioned it many a time, but if you do want to take our online course, just head to our website. You can see it there and have a look. We also have a few other online courses as well. I saw a lot of questions about human remains, so we have courses about human remains as well, if anyone is particularly interested in those as an artifact as well. But without further ado, do check out our website, give us a follow on social media if you haven't already, and of course, become a subscriber if you'd like to help support us in running more events like these. Get access to all of our online courses and all of our past events as well. But without further ado, I'll let you all get on with your evening. Thank you again for coming to our talk, and we'll see you again next time. Goodbye, everyone.